So, John, it's wonderful to have you here at the Learn at Lunchtime. And what we're going to be looking at is visible learning. Obviously, your baby, and now a grown-up child that's kind of reached adolescence, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been over 15, 16 years now. And the good
And
news
so,
is it's not my baby anymore. It's in many different places, many different parents.
and how many countries across the world is visible learning? So, number one, the book in, but number two, the process in.
I don't know the answer. I know it's got 30 something translations. I know I've been working in schools in at least 23 countries, but I do get commentary from others in other countries that they know the ideas, they're trying to use them. I think I've matured a lot over the years, and we've moved away from the top 10 and the bottom 10 to looking more at the underlying story. And so I have the privilege, Stephen, of having the world's best critics. And so I get good criticism. Sometimes, no, many of them I learn from. And if you ever read the sequel, chapter 2, I talk about the critics and what I've learned from them. And that's the best privilege you can have as an academic, is to have criticism. And that's how we grow. So, yeah, it's reasonably widely known. And I hope it gets more widely known, because obviously I'm biased, thinking that I want others to pick up those ideas, explore them, expand them, and own them.
So, if you were to just kind of sum it up in a kind of few sentences, what would you say visible learning is?
Well, I still go back to the byline I started with. It's getting teachers to see learning through the eyes of their students, and getting students to learn how to become their own teachers. Those two notions have never changed, and they're still powerful. I want teachers to spend much more time understanding what learning means from a student's point of view. I want students to know what to do when they don't know what to do. I want them to teach others. I want them to teach themselves. We saw in COVID that some of our students are so dependent on us, and we love it sometimes. That's not the world they're going to live in. They're going to have to know how to make decisions, to seek help, to try different alternatives, to do error detection. And they can do it at age 5, but by age 8, they become too dependent on us, and I think that's the problem.
And so, Visible Learning Plus is the program that sits behind your work. And again, that's been going about 15 years. Can you tell us a little bit more about the program, how it, what it is really in its essence?
Well, we use the 5D model of work here. Where the first D is discovery and diagnosis. And the first thing we do is what we call our school capability matrix. Like, as we work, Stephen, across your countries, every single school we've ever been in, there's pockets of success. And the argument we put is, as educators, we're pretty good at finding problems and fixing them. We're not very good at finding success and scaling it up. So let's identify what we're doing really well in the school and we're not doing so well. And we have this matrix that we look at, and we look at what... Now, when we ask teachers to choose their professional learning, too often they choose the learning which they're already good at. That's okay, but not good enough. So how can we get that balance right? How can we optimize and celebrate where we're having success and not? Now, the way we do this is we ask the schools for their evidence, and sometimes they struggle to give us the evidence. Oh, so this is a safe school. Yeah, this is really good. And then another teacher says, but what about that bullying incident that happened last week that was really major? Well, that's evidence. So bringing all that evidence together, and in light of that, and we do not collect the data. We help you with the data, but we want to hear your interpretation. And that sometimes is the success, and sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes we're very good at papering over. And I do this in my life. When things don't work, the system didn't work. The kettle wasn't boiled hot enough to make my cup of coffee. Something else went wrong. It was me. And one of the things we don't do very well in our business, Stephen, is we don't acknowledge success and attribute it to the teachers. We're very quick at attributing failure to teachers, and that's not where we want to go. So what are we successful at? What is our capability? Where do we need to attend? Second D is coming up with the implementation, coming up with the actual design of what is the implementation we're going to do that relates to the diagnosis, not just the one that we want to have. Like some schools, we want to have feedback. Well, you're actually pretty good at feedback. No, you don't. You want to look at something else. So how does it relate? Then we look at the hard one, the implementation, fidelity of implementation. So many great programs in your country and mine, they fail because of bad implementation. And it's like I found in the early days of visible learning, teachers saying, oh, principals, we're going to do those top 10. We're doing them. But if you take one of those top 10 and you implement it poorly, of course it's not going to work. All education's local in that sense. And then it's that evaluation phase where we actually have success criteria and we stop every now and then and say, how well are we going? And if we're being successful, let's instill it in the water and let's move somewhere else. And how do we scale it up? So you can hear there's no one right way for all schools. It is very bespoke, but the message is the same. Great diagnosis. We've worked out 5 or 6 programs that have got incredible good for implementation relating to the school capability matrix, working with schools about implementation in every class, with every teacher, with every student, so it becomes the narrative of the school. This is what normal is here. And then obviously feeding back the impact. Like, I don't think there's a teacher in the world, Stephen, who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to make my kids miserable. I'm going to have a day-to-day where they don't learn. It's not that at all, but sometimes we do things that are not very efficient, that don't have the same bang for the buck as other teachers. And it's taking those ones that have small effects and magnifying it. In our jargon, accelerating the effect. And that's the major message of Visible Learning Plus. We've worked probably with around 700,000 or 800,000 teachers over the last 10, 15 years, many, many schools around the world. I'm in the back office. I get the data of the evaluation and I look very closely. Is this having an effect on the students in the school? Most professional learning stops with the teachers. I want to see the impact on the students. And we do.
So who would you say visible learning's for then? What sort of schools is it for? What sort of districts is it for? Is it for teachers?
Well, we've introduced it probably in every shape, size, nature of school that you can imagine in the world, from very, very poor schools in Africa right through to some of the richest schools in your country. It applies everywhere because it's not a single method for all. It's that simple notion. How do you get educators to walk into a classroom, to walk into a staff room and say, my job today is to evaluate my impact? How do I think evaluatively about merit and value and worth? How do I think about what sufficient progress is? That's the fundamental message that I think crosses every school in the world. So no, I'm ambitious, Stephen. I think this can apply in any school. It just requires the courage. And that's probably the biggest lack.
So if Visible Learning Plus, the program, is the answer to development, what would you say the problem were, or the problems are that people are facing?
It's that courage notion, Stephen. Is much easier as a school leader to worry about the bus timetables, to worry about the discipline, to worry about the curriculum, to worry about the test scores, to worry about Ofsted, to worry about whether the buildings are painted right, to worry about every classroom is quiet, than it is to worry about the impact of all your teachers. It is much easier.
So, and what about in the classrooms? What are you seeing going on in terms of the manifestation of the problems of not focusing on learning?
I think if all of us could go back to Mr. Gradgrind and Charles Dickens, where we had every kid in a straight row, where they all taught the same thing, it was about the facts, it was highly disciplined, we'd say that was a pretty good classroom, but it's not the classroom we want for this century. Classrooms are messy, classrooms are noisy, learning is messy, learning is hard work, learning is noisy, and so this is the nature of what we have to do in our classrooms. Employers are asking now for graduates who can work in teams. Sadly, I don't see a lot of that in some of our schools. I see every kid working for themselves, almost Hunger Games, particularly in exams. Not good enough. And so how do we change that culture so that students are working together to learn and to do assessments by themselves and also in teams? It's so much easier to do the opposite and to do the easy stuff. Now, I don't want to underestimate, because my view in your country and mine, over half the teachers are already doing the kind of things we're talking about in visible learning. We have a good momentum, but our rhetoric isn't about that. Like you'd notice in England and Australia, it's all about, yet again, fiddling and tweaking the curriculum. It's all about whether teachers' workload, which I don't want to underestimate, it is an issue. It's all about those kind of things that surround it. It's about the buildings. It's about the money. Of course, these things are important. But it's what we use the money for, to invest in the expertise of our educators. No, we're not. We're putting it in buildings. We're putting it in curriculum. We're putting it in central office. It's that focus constantly about impact that drives our system and I think can make a huge difference.
So why do you think schools struggle so much to solve this issue of moving to the focus on learning impact?
Well, for many teachers, let's say the 20-year out veteran, they've had 20 years of building up a theory of teaching that works for them. And it probably does work for them. But if they're not getting that average 0.4 effect, I don't think they have any right to the autonomy to teach as they wish when a teacher down the corridor is getting a much greater impact. I don't think they have any right to be left alone. And so I think there is a stage where someone has to step in, and this is the courage notion, and say, we've got to change here. Now, you're going to talk to Vivian Robinson during this symposium of the World Education Summit, and she'll say change is a dirty word. And she's kind of right. Except for those teachers below the average, I'm sorry, I want to change them. But Vivian's right. Every teacher can improve. Some need to improve more than others. And this is where leadership becomes very important. This is where the courage of leadership to call it. It's not going to, every one of your coaches on a Saturday at your football league makes a decision afterwards about the team next week. We don't have that luxury in the same ways, but we can identify where it's not working and improve it. And yes, some teachers systematically are below average, but some days I'm below average and I need to be called on that. Now, you can do it nastily and name and shame me, or you can work with me to improve me. I think all of us as humans are improvement engines, and that's what I want to see happen in all our schools, a focus on improvement. Viviana's right.
So what does it look like when a school's been through the visible learning process and these things start to be solved? What does it look like at district level, at small network of school level, at leadership level, at teacher level, and at learner level?
And we've done it right across every school in the state here in Australia. And we did it in many, many schools across parts of Europe, whole systems. And what's normal here? We talk about learning. We talk about struggle. We bring along problems of practice and share them. We collectively are in this. This is what's going on here. And the students speak the same language. Sometimes we struggle with the parents. They think, despite their backgrounds, no matter what they did at school, good or bad, they think schooling still should be straight rows, discipline, and focus on the facts. Sadly, that's not the nature of what learning is. And so it's how we can actually create that narrative to bring our parents, to bring our students. But the most powerful way is through the students. Talking to students what it means to be a good learner. Talking to students about what they do when they get it wrong. Having that kind of language is, to use the COVID analogy, is the virus that I want to spread.
So could you give some examples from schools that are quite far down the pathway of what looks different in a classroom, or what feels different?
What feels different is what the students talk about and how they talk in class, how they work together, what they do when they go down that learning pit and don't know what to do. When you ask them about what are they learning, how do they know whether the work they've done is good, how do they know how to improve it, that's the kind of language that we see in visible learning schools as normal. We don't see as much compliance. We don't see students doing, just engagement is not doing the work. Engagement is about being in the driver's seat. And we use this analogy of creating learners as drivers of their own learning. And they know when to seek help. Like novices don't know what they don't know. So they need teachers. It's not getting rid of the teachers. They need teachers. But sometimes they need to be able to go up to the teacher and say, I'm struggling here, and not be looked at as, oh, there goes old stupid again. All of us, and if we're not struggling, we're not learning. And so that's what we see in these schools. And as I keep saying, it's like kids learning video games. They want to engage in this thing. They want to come back and be challenged. They do not want to be bored. They don't want to do stuff they know. They don't want to be repetitious and go over and over and just do stuff for the sake of doing it. They want that challenge. They want that struggle. And that's what we see in these schools.
So I'm just going to go to the example. I was just going to go to the example of Stonefields School, John, where I know you've got a lot of personal interests and stuff like that, which to me showed one of the biggest contrasts between an average classroom and a visible learning classroom, where suddenly the work disappears from the wall and it's a very different replacement. Could you just explain to people what that transformation looks like?
Sure, and I invite everyone to go to the Stonefields website in Auckland, New Zealand, and they've got so many resources on there. You can see the classrooms, you can see. Now, it's a school where they have 100 kids with 3 teachers, and the biggest impact there is the teachers have to work together to create and critique and share their concepts, their values of thinking. And that's the power of what it does. It's hard work. And I've seen Sarah and the leadership team and Chris and that have incredible hard work to make it happen. All you need is one teacher who wants their own classroom and it's over. Sarah has been stunning at doing it because the effects they have on the students, you're right, it is one of the most well-known schools in New Zealand. It's world famous because of its impact on kids. And it's not in an area that has high resource kids. It's an quarry. It's an interesting area. Now, what they focus on always is that notion of collective efficacy. How do we do this together? How do we do this as a whole school? How do we do this as a whole unit of teachers? How do we do it together? How do we get one teacher to do a lot of the planning and the other teachers not to do the planning, but to be the implementers of it and build up critique so that next year we're building on a better model? And they've built up an incredible amount of resources since they started about 15 years ago that does this. Now, and Stonefields is not unique. There are many, many schools that I've been in England. The whole school's doing it, and they have that collective notion. Because our argument is you can't do it one teacher at a time, you can't do it one school at a time. You've got to do it system-wide, and you've got to start at the school and work up. School is the unit of analysis. So principals, this is where it comes to you. You have to be there, you have to be up front, and you have to speak this language every day.
So now I think one of the things that struck me was how they'd kind of taken everything off the walls and replaced those with kind of steps, which the students could notionally talk about the steps. So they stopped talking about the work that they were doing in a performative way and started to talk about the progress and the progressions that they were making. I wonder if you can just explain a little bit more in detail about what that element is and how that's such a driver for learning in the students.
I know, but I'm a little nervous here because I want to get this right because not so long ago I got it wrong and I got smacked over the hands for getting it wrong and that person was right. So let me be careful here. The first thing I'd ask your teachers to do is to take your kids to another classroom and then ask them to write down what's on their wall. Most kids haven't a clue. So why do we do all that all the time? I know because I've been to your house, Stephen, and I can look behind you and see those 3 posters of Egypt. Now, you know what they are because you're living in that house. And I know what they are because I can see them there today. But if you had asked me an hour ago what was on the wall, given I've been to your house, I probably wouldn't remember. Wall art is something that is there, it's nice, but it doesn't imprint. And what they did at that school is, let's not do that because of what you said. It focuses on what has happened. We want to focus on what is happening. It's the same with what they do with homework. They have these apps. And during the day, Stephen does something interesting. So I say to Stephen, get on the app and jot it down. That becomes the dinner time conversation. It's a conversation about learning. It's a conversation about Stephen having success or struggling. It's not about what most parents ask their students, what did you do at school today? Oh my God, why are we so focused on the what? Learning is about the why. Why is it so? Evaluation. Why is it so? We've got to move it more to that why. And that's where in Stonefields, they got rid of all the distractions, all the periphery, and said our focus is on what's happening in there, that inner thinking right now. Incredibly powerful.
So, John, in the Visible Learning Plus program, what are we doing differently with schools? You know, at the leadership level, at the teacher level, at impact coach level, and at learner level. What's different to what the other approaches are that are out there?
Well, I think one of the fundamental differences is our focus is on the impact on students. So often professional learning stops with the teachers. Teachers have incredible strong theories of teaching. They come to professional learning, they pick up tips and tricks, they go back, virtually no impact on the kids. We want to impact the students, obviously through the teachers. And our focus is on how they think, much more than what they do. We don't, for instance, go in and say you're teaching the wrong way. That's not where we start. Our focus is on helping them understand their impact through the test scores, through the student assignments, through the artifacts of the student's work, through the teacher noticing and interpretations, and through the student voice about their learning. And it's not only the triangulation of those, but it's also the critique from peers about those interpretations. And so our fundamental premise is we're going to do this together. This is a collective. This is across a school. This is not one teacher at a time. I'm too impatient for that, Stephen. I want to have it at a school level because we need that. Teachers are incredibly good at criticism. Let's optimize that as a powerful thing. And so, how do we do that and have that discussion and get away from telling teachers about how they teach? The impact of your teaching is this. We want to look at it from individual students' point of views, what it means to be a learner in this class, what it means to be challenged, what it means if you don't know in this class. We want that information fed back through the teacher into the school, which is why we spoke so often about the climate of the school and why in the new work I've been doing, I'm saying the fundamental role of the school leadership is the climate and culture in every class and the school. And how do we do that as a collective? And it's building up this notion of whether every student is making at least a year's progress for a year's input. And we know how to do that. We know what it looks like. I'm not pretending it's easy, but it's the right stuff. And looking at those students where the teachers are having a big impact, and as we find in almost every class and every school, it's not necessarily the bright ones. Sometimes they're the ones having the least growth, at least progress. And so looking at those that are not and saying, well, let's see how we can help you in your class with those students not making progress so we can move them as well. So that's the focus of all our work, the collective efficacy about impact.
So it's a framework for looking at it. It's a set of measures for bringing
Yes.
into that and really examining it critically. It's the expert guidance through coaches to have these incredibly difficult conversations
Yes.
and then to gear up. And then it's bringing the evidence and the tight focus into the practice in the classroom for the impact it's having on the learners and their learning.
Stephen, one of the hardest things is when you find a teacher in a school that's having an incredible positive impact on students. It's very, very hard to get those teachers to attribute their success to them. They are so generous and nice. They said, no, it was the students. No, it was the resources. No, it was the small class size. No, it was the curriculum. No, it was the school leadership. No, it wasn't. It was them. On the other hand, you know that when a teacher's not having success, we blame the teacher. Why do we have a culture where we deny our expertise? And there's plenty of it. And that's the premise we start from. Let's identify success and attribute it to the teacher and spread that virus.
And this isn't sharing best practice, John, which I know you have evidence of.
Please not do that. No, it's the last thing you want to do. Like, what is best practice? Too often we bring along a resource, and of course teachers are generous. You can have it. Here's all my lesson plans. Here's all my resources. Here's all my tests. That is not what matters. It's the judgments you make on the go during the lesson about the implementation of that resource. Yeah, it helps to start with a high probability lesson plan, but it's those evaluative judgments that we want to capture. That's what makes the difference, and best practice denies that. I don't like best practice at all.
So what we're trying to do then is level up that evaluative thinking amongst all teachers, develop a shared language which is also shared with the students, becomes incredibly explicit, and then that's what allows it to drive the learning.
And like, you know, my wife is a professor of evaluation, and she's very critical of me about how I use evaluative thinking, etc. So I put the pressure back on her once, and I said, well, make it easy. What is evaluative thinking? And she said, it's when you're nosy. And you know those teachers. They want to know how you're thinking, Stephen. They don't want to know what you're feeling today. They want to know what your success is like. They want to know about what you know and you don't know. They want to know what's going on. They're incredibly nosy. They don't sit back and assume that there's a problem, it's you. The problem is me. I wasn't as effective. So permission to be nosy.
And so what we're trying to do is really dig into those 40 to 50% of times where students are in a state of boredom or apathy, and it's different students at different times, and be really nosy about that, inquiring about that, and then replanning this in terms of progressions and understanding what those progressions are.
Like, I think it's fascinating that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of books about teacher talking and teacher talk, student voice, virtually nothing about listening. Surely the greatest sign of respect I can have for you, Stephen, and any listener on this program today is to not only listen to them, but demonstrate I've heard. I don't have to agree with you, but demonstrate I'm listening. And that's the nosy nation. I want to know how you're thinking. Don't have to agree with you. I want to know how you're making decisions, how you're actually going through the process of connecting ideas, because that's probably where you're going wrong. But I can't fix it unless I know what's happening in that inner learning.
So, in terms of impact, then, John, obviously, you've been doing this work now for 15 years. I know you ran a large scale impact study to have a look and evaluate across different countries and stuff. What were the findings of that, and what sort of impact would people expect if they were to invest in this program?
Well, yeah, during COVID, we did take the opportunity to look back over the last 10 years of data. And yeah, we got data on 10, 15,000 schools, many, many more thousands of teachers and obviously kids. And so that's what we spent our time doing. And yes, we can improve maths and reading compared to not doing the program, 0.4, 0.5. Yes, it usually takes 1 to 3 years to get that effect. It's not a quick fix. So yes, we can add value to maths and reading, but the way we start it with within the first 6 weeks, we want to have a narrative in the school about learning. We want to share and identify where we're having that pockets of success, of massive progress, massive acceleration, and we want to share that thinking. And sometimes it's the 4-year out teacher and not the 20-year out teacher that's having that progress. We need to legitimize that. Nothing wrong with experience, but experience does not equal expertise. It's a mixture. And so how do we have that conversation? How do we get the school leaders, getting teachers to be critics of each other in a way that's very safe and is making a difference to the lives of students? Like, I don't think there's any teacher in the world who wakes up in the morning and says, my job today is to make my students miserable and make sure they go backwards. No, that's not the case at all. But sometimes the speed, the acceleration of learning is not as fast as a teacher down the corridor. And we've got to learn about how to accelerate learning and how to actually make sure that we are stretching growth, that we're making sure that every teacher has incredibly high expectations, because that's ways of thinking that makes the difference.
And so it's really pulling apart practice, abandoning that which is not working and doing stuff, and then building up and securing the practice that is already working within the school rather than adding lots of new things to it.
Well, you've hit on one there that we've spent a lot of time on, and it's a real struggle. Getting teachers and schools to stop doing things that are not effective or efficient. Oh my goodness, it's tough. Like, some schools have been administering tests for 20 years. And I say to them, well, tell me about the interpretation. Oh, we don't interpret them, but we have to do them because we always do them. What inefficiencies. And when I look at teachers creating lesson plans that 2 million teachers have already created, and they're not using AI to create a lesson plan and then improving it, but starting from square one, not collectively looking at the impact of our lesson plan so that we know what to build on next year, know what to throw away. We aren't very good at stopping things that are not efficient. And unfortunately, that leads to our burnout. And that's one of the things we do in our visible learning work. As part of the implementation, let us help you stop doing some things. You can't just add another thing to the pile. That's
so
hard.
recognizing key ingredients, really focusing on the evaluative conversations around what's happening there, developing those progressions, developing learners, making teachers' lives more effective, if you like, and more efficient as the process is kind of where visible learning is. And I think what it does, what I've seen it do anyway, is leave schools with an incredible implementation platform then to move forward with, that everyone understands and they feel that they can make progress with.
This is what is normal in the school. That's what we want it to be. This is the narrative. This is what we do. We are collectively focused on impact.
So thank you, John. If you want to find out more about the Visible Learning Plus program, just get in touch with us. There's a button below that you just need to hit, or just get in touch with osiriseducational.co.uk, and we'll put you in touch wherever you are in the world. There are consultants who work in the visible learning format.